Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar on post-award evaluation and financial reporting. Going to give this a minute for people to get here. I just heard my own Outlook alert go off, so I'm assuming others will be joining, but for those of you coming in, welcome. We will get started in about, let's say, 90 seconds. In the meantime, you'll have this lovely photo to look at. I promise to not hum you a song. And I'll actually, for those of you coming in too, I'll launch a poll in a second. Okay, as you are coming in, I'm going to leave this poll open for a while here in the background. So I just launched a poll on your experience around reporting on grants. So answer that when you have a moment. I'm going to leave that open for a while. All right. Give it 20 more seconds. By the 8th of these, I should have known to bring some music for our opener as people come in. All right, let's get started. So we are here to talk about how you manage and report on your grants. So the post stuff. If you don't want to talk about that, you may be in the wrong place. If you do want to talk about that, welcome. And I can see from the poll, for those of you who've come in already, we have some newbies on reporting here, so this is good. I'm hoping at the very least over the next hour I can reduce your heartburn around this topic, because I know it is not it's not a favorite for a lot of people. But couple quick things here about Grants Plus. This is the why you should listen to me slide for those of you who haven't seen it. So NCCER is working with Grants Plus. I am a senior advisor at Grants Plus, and we are a nationwide grant seeking firm. We don't call ourselves grant writers. We are grant professionals because we handle the grants process. We handle relationships, finding funders, building in post grant work into your pre-grant, all that fun stuff. So we kind of handle soup to nuts on grants. I have about 20 years experience in fundraising. The past 10 of it has been just on, oh my God, no, the past 12 of it has been just on grants. So I have seen all sides of this coin. And we're just excited to be working with NCCER to be helping out organizations, a lot of whom, as we've talked to over our partnership here, are kind of just starting out in grant seeking or know they need more money because there's more people coming to them for assistance and want to see this as an avenue. So we're doing several things here. For those of you who have not seen this slide before, we've been doing a webinar series. This is number 8. There's one more that kind of wraps it all up and then talks about the future of grant seeking next month. For those of you who haven't seen the past ones, the page where you registered for this and the page we'll send out with the recording of this there's recordings for all the past ones up there. So please feel free to take a look. And if any of those catch your interest, watch them. Also, where you signed up for this, you saw there are a bunch of pre-vetted funding opportunities available, and those are updated regularly. We just put a few up either yesterday or this morning. We have coaching sessions available where you can come get a half hour to talk one-on-one with one of our senior grants experts and just ask anything. A lot of it is, how do I start? But come talk to us about anything. We've also got some drop-in office hours because we heard a lot of you have 5-minute questions, not 30-minute questions. So the next one of those is next Tuesday at 4 o'clock. I think that will be me. I'll be available on Teams. You'll see where you signed up for this on that landing page. There'll be links for those. You can just click launch Teams and say hi to me. I'll be there. It's like when you used to go see a teacher at school sitting in their office, only virtual. And then there's some great downloadable grant seeking guides on there, which are some really good kind of one-page advice on multiple things. So I'm leaving the poll open as people are coming in. A couple things about today. First of all, if you have questions, please feel free to ask them at any time, but use the Q&A feature that's up on your control bar instead of chat. It's just easier to track things via Q&A. And we're going to talk about two main areas today. We're going to talk about how to build evaluation into your program design so that once you've got to report back on what you're doing, it's way less painful. And then identifying what private and government funders expect to see from those reports. We're not going to do it exactly in that order. It's going to be a little bit of a sandwich of our topics. So let's get started. I'm going to close the poll in a second. But first things first, spoiler, being able to successfully complete your reporting on your grants without pain starts before you apply. It starts in your program design. It starts in your proposal. So we're going to talk about what that looks like. I'm going to leave the poll open for those of you who just came in. We've got a poll open right now. I'm going to leave it open for about another 10 seconds while I take a sip of water here, and then we'll go. All right, so we've got a good mix. Let me share that quickly. So about 60% of you have never done financial or program reporting. Good, that means you're going to do it right from the start. One of you has been part of a team that's done the financial reporting and program reporting, but hasn't had the main responsibility, and one of you has been the main person responsible. So if you're in one of those later two groups, I hope that we're able to teach you to do this in ways that are less painful. Because it can be painful if you don't have a plan and suddenly you're 9 months into your grant and you've got to report on it. That has led to some sleepless nights. So let's get started about what this looks like if your post-grant success is starting before your proposal submission. So a real bottom line up top, developing systems before you get the grant is key. So before you even submit to a funder, you should have a pretty clear understanding of who is doing the tracking. You should know how they're going to do it, what systems they're going to use. You should know where the results are going to be kept and who will have access to them. And for all of your sake, I hope the answer is not a binder on a shelf. And you should also know who is going to evaluate that data and build in program improvements. So one of the things, and I think for this crowd where a lot of you are doing education, this is not as much of an issue as it might be for others. But a lot of times people spend a whole bunch of effort reporting for grants and then don't do anything with it. They don't improve their programs. They don't improve their outreach. It just is, we report it back to the funder and it's done. And that is the worst way to do this because you're investing time and effort into doing this reporting. You may as well improve yourself while you're doing it. So know that you've got some sort of a plan to actually make changes to your programming if the data you're collecting warrants that. And we're not going to talk about that a lot, but I just wanted to put that out there. This isn't just for the funders. This is also for you and making your programs better, making your programs more efficient, et cetera. So that pep talk over. Also, where you can, use systems you already have in place. I'm going to give a few examples of this. But for those of you who are doing apprenticeship programs, who are doing training, you probably have some kind of intake or enrollment. You know who your students are. You probably have some kind of attendance tracking. You know if they're showing up for class. You may or may not have some tracking of them where they go after they've been out of your program. Do they find employment elsewhere? Do they stay with your company? Whatever that is. So you're probably already doing this stuff. So build that in. Think of ways that you can do your reporting using that stuff. And we'll give some examples of this. Also, if you need new stuff, write it into the program budget. We'll get to that asterisk in a second. So this can mean you need new software. You need tracking software for attendance or something. You want to bring in a consultant to track the effectiveness of your program versus a different program, or make sure that your program is effective versus what people need in the field, whatever that is. And build in staff time. Somebody's got to do this evaluation anyway. If you're having to add a bunch of staff time for that, build it in. The asterisk on that is that sometimes that's prohibited by the program or the funder, more for private than for government. We'll talk about that in a second as well. So use what you've already got and develop the systems before you get the grant. Just those two things. If that's all you learn right now, that's what you take away from this, you'll be in a better spot. So what do you want to track? There's a few things here. So for private funders, for those of you who've been to earlier webinars, You know that private funders, grant makers, are funding us to create change that they want to see in the world. We are the vendors of that change. So we have to report back to them. We have to show them that we are creating the change that they want to see in the world. For government funders, it's sort of that, but a little different. You are more reporting on process. You are doing what you said you would do, and you are producing the outcomes you're expected to produce. So show private funders you're creating change, show government funders you're doing what you said you would do. Slight difference. And for both of them, you want to be able to show them that you are spending the grant money in a manner that is consistent with your grant agreement. In other words, you're spending the money on what you have both agreed that the money should be spent on. So looked at kind of in this macro, it's not very scary. It's all just reporting back to the people who are funding you that their money is making a difference and that you are a good investment. So where do you know the specifics of this? For private funders, it's a little bit sloppy sometimes, but they're grant award letters. So you get a letter from them that says, congratulations, here's $50,000 for your apprenticeship program. It should have something like, we expect a report at 6 months and a year. Here's the information that should be in there. If that's not there, talk to the funder, ask them what they want. Make sure that you are giving them something back so they know that they're investing the money wisely, so they give you more money. For government funding, there's going to be no ambiguity there. I will show you in a little bit, but the program is probably going to have some exact requirements on what you need to report back on, what you're expected to demonstrate. And if that doesn't, the funding agreement will. So as much as I know people sometimes dread government reporting, to me, in a lot of ways, it's easier because you know exactly what you're getting into. So let's do a quick summary here of private funders. What are you building in? We talked about building methods into your program, the near programming that let you report back, but you need to show them you are doing the work you said you would do, that you're serving the people you said you would serve, that you're producing the outputs and the outcomes. So outputs is 50 people are going to come to class every day. Outcomes are 50 people are going to get great jobs, that you're actually producing that. And again, that you spent the grant the way that you said you would. So let's look at these a little bit deeper and give some examples. So first things first, doing the work. Are you doing what you said you would do? So tracking your outputs. So for a lot of you, this means you may have to build in some tracking of your outreach activities, because I know some funding is out there for, we want to bring in people who have not had jobs in crafts before. We want to bring in populations that are not represented. So you want to track your outreach activities to show, yes, we are reaching out to those populations, we're bringing them in. You want to have, and I'm hoping you're already doing this, but maintaining up-to-date enrollment numbers so you know who is in the programs. Then on top of that, building in attendance tracking so that you know that people are coming to class. They are doing what you said they will do. The funder's money is being used to pay for them going to class, and they're actually going. And if you're able to, it's really cool if you're able to include, how much time people are spending doing hybrid work at home, how much they're in labs, how much are in the classroom, et cetera. If you can report on all that, that will let you talk about trends, things like that, which are always good. Because again, for those of you who have done some of these, you know that with grant one, you should already be thinking about next year's grant. So all of this is, and here's how we're showing you we're making a change, so you want to invest in us again. So building all of that in. Also, making sure that you have some way of tracking that your staff are doing what they said they would do as far as time-wise. And this becomes more of a thing for government than it does for private. But again, just knowing that you can say, yes, I know that this teacher, this instructor that you are paying half of their salary, they were here every day, just like we said they would be. They worked 2,000 hours this year. You paid for 1,000 of them. Thank you. We did what we said we were going to do. So just being able to demonstrate that they were there. So a real world example of this, and I love this one because of its simplicity. So this is, I will warn you that this is a 10-year-old example, and technology has improved enough that this is no longer the case. But we have friends who worked for a food bank organization that their job was they supported about 70 little neighborhood food pantries. So these were, things in church basements, things at community centers, all of that. And they did not have the infrastructure or the training for sophisticated tracking. So, every grant for this food pantry was how many people are you serving, who you're serving, et cetera, because that's very important to funders. And they needed to figure out a way to track that. So recognizing the limitations that the organization faced, and I will say I'm saying this with love, one of those limitations was that these pantries were run by the nicest little old ladies ever who were not about to learn how to use a Generation 1 iPad to check people in. So recognizing these limitations, the organization said, okay, every year, every pantry is going to get a stack of postcards. So if the pantry's open every week, they're going to get 55 postcards that say, pantry 1. And we're going to send those all to the pantries. As people come in that day, they grab the postcard, somebody makes tick marks on the postcard. So people walk by, they make tick marks. End of the day, they drop that postcard in the mail. The food bank gets those postcards every Monday. I don't know if it was Monday, but every week, one weekday, their lovely admin person would put on some headphones and just enter in all this information off the postcards into their spreadsheet for that week. So she'd have, 60, 70 postcards, put in the date, the total, and the pantry, and move on. And the organization, just by doing that simple thing, which cost them very little. I mean, what's a postcard and a postcard stamp times 100? Gave them the ability to say, we are serving X people in total. We are serving Y people in this neighborhood. This pantry has seen an increase of whatever over the past year. They were able to do some fairly sophisticated data work just based on that. So I realize this is not directly applicable to the stuff you guys do, but just as an example of something simple, cheap, and effective, and how they were able to then show funders what their needs were, what their community needs were, and that the funders were making a difference. They said they were going to serve X people in this neighborhood, and they were able to report that they did. So again, simple, easy, effective, kind of the best. Just an example of a thing that you can do that is not going to be terribly sophisticated, but get you what you need. So then that's tracking what they did. They said they were going to serve X people, they did. But then tracking who you are serving, they couldn't really do that. You guys, I think, can. With the assumption that you've got some enrollment information, as part of that, as people are signing up for your programs, gathering some student demographics. And it doesn't have to be intense, but age, gender, ethnicity, education, attainment level, income, some basic things. And as you're looking at different funders, you may find some want to fund you for getting women into the workforce. Some want to fund you for getting transition age youth into the workforce. Some want to fund you for getting people from low-income neighborhoods into the workforce. So just making sure that whatever funding you're applying for, making sure that you're tracking who the people you're serving are based on that. So you maybe don't need all of that, but you need that for the funders that you're going to, knowing what they care about. Also documenting members of special groups. So I have on here parents, reentry populations. Again, that could be, women who have never thought about a trade career before, whatever that is. Just again, ticking off like, yes, this person is a parent who is looking to find a job after having their kid, or is a mid-career person who left IT and wants to do something hands-on, whatever that is. Just having a little tick mark where you document that. The nice part about this is that not only does this let you tell funders, we said we were going to serve low-income women, we served low-income women. It also lets you internally identify any trends or changes about who's using your programs. So if you've got a program and you say, we want to bring more women in, you're not tracking that there are women in your program. You're not able to tell a funder, yes, we said we were going to bring women in, and here they are. You're also then not able to have any real understanding of, hey, are we bringing in more women? Were we successful in this? You don't have the data. And you may have the anecdotal data. You may see more long hair in your classes, but the plural of anecdote is not data. So just again, keeping these simple things and having them lets you go back to funders in fairly sophisticated ways and talk about what you're doing. So a great example of that, there's an organization that serves Somali refugee youth. Mostly youth whose families escaped Somalia over the past 10, 15 years, where for those of you who follow that section of the world at all, things are not going well there. And in this case, there is some real gender imbalance. Girls are expected to stay home and have babies and care for the house, and that's it, except you're in America now where that doesn't have to be your only career path. So this organization was trying to have girls show up and do more of it, of the career prep work that it does. It does a lot of work getting kids to graduate high school and move into careers. And by the way, I should connect them with some of you. But they were finding that girls weren't showing up. So they already, through a grant for an after school program, were taking daily attendance. They had these cool little ID, every kid had an ID card for the program, and they had a nice little scanner that the kid would scan, boop, 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 I'm here for class. So what they did is they then, through their intake stuff, made sure each student had a demographic profile in that system. So not only did they know that Matt was showing up, they knew that Matt, the middle-aged white guy who lives in Cleveland, was showing up. It let them track not just that this person was there, but who this person is. So by doing that, what they were able to show was when we are just doing a generalized session on career prep, we're just having a speaker come in, we're having an engineer come in and talk about their career. Girls were really spotty. The attendance for all of those was mostly boys. They were finding that, a girl would show up once for 3 sessions, et cetera, et cetera. So they got a grant as part of their thing on bringing more girls into career prep. They got a grant to do these sessions only for girls. So they would find a woman who was an engineer and have her come in and talk to girls about being a woman in engineering and some of the challenges she faced, et cetera, et cetera. And they were able to find that, hey, when we have these sessions, not only do girls show up, but the same girl shows up every time. So we're able to show, yes, there are 30 girls in each of these sessions, and like 29 of them are the same every time. So these girls are getting this whole exposure. And they actually were able to show, hey, we really need to do these girls only programs. Dear funder, we need more funding for this. And the funder agreed. So they were able to A, report back that they were doing exactly what they said they were going to do, and B, make the funder happy enough to renew it. So again, a good example of using stuff they already had. The only difference was they had kids scan their little ID card for these job sessions instead of just classes. That's it, as far as the impact on the kids goes. But they were able to show this grant was making a huge difference. Also, built-in tracking about the outcome. So not just the outputs, not just that you're doing, you said what you're going to do, that you're serving who you said you were going to serve, but that you're having the long-term outcomes. So tracking how your students leave the program and what happens after. So again, for you, tracking who graduates or completes. Like I said, you can combine that with demographics to look for some trends. Make sure that, yes, while we're bringing in women, they're not graduating. Showing that, yes, we're bringing in women and they're also graduating, maybe at a higher rate than the men, who knows? But not only are we being effective in bringing in who we said we were going to, we are effectively teaching them and bringing them into careers. Including any post-completion tracking that you can. So again, this is probably not something that's automatically built in, although for those of you who are running a program for your company, you've got some access to this. So including the time between their completion and whether they get a new job or whether they move up, whatever that is, and then documenting any salary increase or new salary. Where possible, being able to track long-term things like how long they stay in a particular job, how many raises they get, how their income increases, all of that is great. So being able to show not only are we getting people into good jobs, but over 10 years, look, they almost double their pay, whatever that is. I realize that's also a little harder to track. So I have a great example of this that's not exactly applicable depending on how many people are getting craft jobs through LinkedIn, but we had a client forever ago that was they were a liberal arts college, but they had a strong STEM program, a little bit of an anomaly. And they actually had a multi-year federal grant to bring in first-generation college students for their population. It was Hispanic students and women who are underrepresented in STEM careers, so people who are not going into the sciences. So as part of this program, they had every student learn how to use LinkedIn. So, there was, all these soft skills around careers, and every student learned how to use LinkedIn, and then they each created an account, and then the professor that ran this program followed each one of those accounts. As the students graduated, they were not about to pick up their phone. This is, I guess, not forever ago. This is maybe 8 years ago. A 22-year-old 8 years ago or today is not going to pick up an unknown number on their phone to answer a survey about their job. But they were continuing to update their LinkedIn profiles as they were getting jobs, as they were getting promotions, as they were going elsewhere. They kept updating their profiles. So our friend, the professor, about once a year, would go through his list of students and see who is still in a STEM career. And through very little effort of his own, was able to do this great long-term tracking. I mean, by now, I think it's probably in its 9th or 10th year of, for most of the students, being able to track, they graduated, they got a job here, and then I can show you their career progression. So knowing who is still in STEM, who had gotten advancements, who went back to school, et cetera, et cetera. So a wealth of information that he was able to mine, that he did not have to keep on his own, that he did not have to develop on his own, that he did not have to solicit on his own. So I love this example. I think it's sort of an outlier on, offshoring your work to somebody else. But with as much social media as there is, maybe this is a thing that, you can do to have long-term tracking that is not really coming out of your budget. It's just a little bit of time. So great example on that. So last thing we're going to talk about here is spending. So how do you build in the tracking on that? And unfortunately, I don't have a really great story on that because I don't find accounting super fun or inspiring. If any of you do, I apologize. But basically building in that that the funds are being spent like they're supposed to. So making sure that your grants have an account number so that within your books, and this is required for government, we'll get to that. Within your books, you know that $20,000 came in from funder X, its account number is 1112, and we charge $20 of expenses to account 1112, done. Knowing what positions are going to be funded under that and making sure that you're tracking those expenditures. So we know not just that we're buying stuff, but that we're paying for staff and the salary drew from this account. Knowing that you've got equipment and supplies, what the grant says you're going to buy, and then buying it and maintaining proof of that. So we'll talk about that in the government one in a moment. And then also knowing your indirect. So this is a whole other thing. We talked about it in the budgeting session that we did months ago, but everything you do has administrative costs applied to it. And more funders are open to you saying, here is our program budget. We tacked on 10% or 9% or 13, whatever, for the administrative costs that we take on so that we don't have to, list this all out. Our director, our accountant, our electricity, whatever that is, having that in there. So making sure that you have some way to back that up. And I will say very few private funders require receipts. As long as you give them a good budget versus actual and can tell them how their money was spent, maybe by breaking on a line item budget, that's usually about as far as you have to go for private funders. So for them, it's not complicated, but Let's talk about our friends in government, and I'm going to launch another poll here. So I will give you guys about 30 seconds to take this, and then I'm going to go through some caveats on the government funding that we're going to talk about. All right, decent mix. Ooh. All right. Give this about 5 more seconds here. So the majority of you, I don't need to share, the majority, 60% of you have gotten government grants. 20% of you have tried and not been successful, and 20 of you think they're great but have not applied. So most of you have gotten government grants. So good, you can feel free to heckle me if this is not your experience, anything I'm going to talk about here. But just some quick notes about what we're going to talk about. Because we can't have 50 webinars with each state, everything we're about to talk about here is based on federal funding, but federal funding influences state and local requirements because a lot of their funding comes from federal sources. A lot of it is passed through, or they've got systems that are set up to deal with federal funding that just get copy pasted on the state funding. So I guarantee you one of you is in a state right now that contradicts something I'm going to say at the state level. But again, don't want to have 50 webinars on that. Also, please don't forget that most government programs are run by helpful professionals who are happy to talk to you. I think most people's first experiences reporting to the government is the IRS, where things feel adversarial, and that carries over. The real simple version of this is don't do a fraud and you'll be fine. Government program people are always happy to talk to you. They're always happy to answer questions. They're always happy to point to whatever in the law governs what you're talking about. Just talk to them. It takes away some of the anxiety. So a few things. Like I said earlier, I think government reporting is actually in many ways easier than private because you know exactly what to expect. Whatever guidelines for whatever program you're applying to are probably going to indicate exactly what you're required to track. And then if you get that funding, the agreement you have with the agency is definitely going to talk about exactly what you're going to do. I will say one exception to this is ARPA funding, which I will be generous, was put together quickly without a long-term plan. And we are finding some clients who got ARPA money who now, months after getting it and spending it, are getting the sort of basic stuff of, oh, and by the way, did you comply with federal regulations? So yeah, we're seeing a little of that. ARPA is a special case. I hope to God that never happens again. But that might be the exception to the rule here. So the program is going to tell you what activities you need to do for this. Who is supposed to be receiving the benefit from those activities? So, many government grants will say specifically, you are dealing with refugee youth, you are dealing with transition age youth, this funding is for people who are having a second career after getting laid off. For those of you who were doing this after the 2008-2009 recession, that was a very, unfortunately, popular theme. So there's going to be some specifics in there about who is receiving it and who is benefiting. Also, that you are meeting the things that you're supposed to be doing. There will be some sort of goals and milestones in the program or within the agreement that you sign. And that your expenses fit within allowable, reasonable, allocable, and documented. We'll talk about those. That's not super exciting, but we'll talk about it. So first things first, this is an example of the Department of Labor Youth Build Grant. Some of you are probably familiar with this. The outcomes that they want with their funding are right here for you. I think this is on like page 4. Fairly upfront, they are telling you what you need to report. So they want to know, what is the rate, the education and employment rate of the kids you're serving, 60 days after they, no, I'm bad at math right now, 90 days after they exit. Then what is it a year after they exit? What are their earnings, et cetera, et cetera. So the program description that you are reading as you're applying is telling you exactly what you need to report back. If you have doubt, that you can track this stuff. If you don't want to track this stuff, if it's going to cause you pain to track this stuff, don't apply. They've told you up front what you've got to talk about. You go in eyes wide open, you know what you've got to do. So digging a little deeper into this grant, those are sort of the big things you've got to report on. This is one little snippet. There is a page and a half of this, of what the anticipated outcomes you are expected to produce with this money are, and how you need to build them into your budget and your work plan. So it's all right there for you. It's saying you need to develop this chart that is showing what's going to happen for all these things. And they even give you this lovely, if poorly formatted, sample chart. Again, this is within the application. You're reading this to apply for the money. Here are the things you have to include. Here's what you're going to be tracking. Here's the example of how it should look. So you know exactly what you're getting into here. Again, it's a little more involved, but you know what it is and you can prepare for it, which takes us into a little reminder: develop the systems before you get the grant. So for any of those on there where you can use the stuff you already have in place, great. You may need to write some new stuff in to track that stuff. And honestly, again, all things being equal, and I realize they're not always, government grants are generally more hospitable to you building evaluation into the grant budget than private funders are. So there's probably an opportunity for you to build increased tracking into the budget, so it will be paid for. So again, usually more intense, but you know exactly what you're getting into. So let's talk about expenses for a minute, because I know this is one of the things that gives people heartache. And one of my best friends has been doing this for MIT and Harvard for years. And except for when they had a professor who was running a secret lab in China, they have not had problems with anything because they keep things within this. So your expenses need to be allowable. That means they are allowed under the grant program and then applicable laws. And there will be, in whatever grant program you're applying for, there will probably be a piece of US or your state code that says allowable means and unallowable means. And unallowable is stuff like alcohol, or, you know, for federal funding, capital. They don't want to build your building unless it's a grant specifically to build your building. Stuff like that. So there's a whole list of what is allowable and what is not allowable. Keep it straight and you're good. The expenses have to be necessary for what you're doing. So, you know, not that there's room in the budgets to do this, but don't go buy a Cadillac for your director just for fun. Whatever the expenses are need to be necessary to make what you promised would happen. Speaking of Cadillacs, they have to be reasonable. So there is government language on here. This federal, not exceed what would be incurred by a prudent person in the same circumstances prevailing at the time, blah, blah, blah. Basically, make sure your expenses are market rate and you can justify that, because this is how they keep somebody from paying their buddy 300 grand a year for a job that normally would be, you know, normally would pay 80. So make sure the expenses are reasonable. And again, there's a little bit of fudge room in here. And you can go, like, I have actually seen a couple clients talk to the agency and say, look, you know, this was actually for a mental health grant, but for whatever reason, the region they were in had high need for, I can't remember if it was psychologists or therapists, but it was expensive to pay for one there. They had a shortage, whatever it was. So they actually had to go to the program staff before they applied and say, just so you know, this is going to be our local market rate, not the US market rate. And I think they may have actually even included in their supplemental info, like a couple job listings that showed, you know, the salary is higher than elsewhere. So again, as long as you can document that it is the market rate where you are, you're good. The government knows this. They reimburse higher in DC and New York than they do in the rest of the country. So this is a thing. Also, that whatever you're spending is specifically for the purpose of the grant. So again, it should have been in that budget, and is not being paid for by other funds. So you're not double dipping. Supplanting federal funds with other federal funds is one of the big sins you're not allowed to do within federal grant making or federal grant processing. So if you have a grant already from the feds that's paying for something, you cannot pay for it out of this grant, either as a double thing or to free up funding from grant A because you're now funding it by grant B. You have to make sure all that is arranged beforehand as part of your grant agreement if that's something you're going to even think about doing. So making sure that they are allocable to the program by being part of the purpose of the program and not paid for elsewhere. So again, don't fraud, no double dipping, you're good. Documenting those expenses. So there's a few things here. And first of all, I talked about adding, code for a grant to your ledger. Government funds, especially federal funds, your state may vary, but I doubt it. Funds and the expenses need to be segregated from other funds within your accounting. And that's not just me. There is the federal language on that. That is within the Code of Federal Regulations. So things need to be tracked on their own. If you get 100,000 in from a federal agency, it needs to sit in its own place in your books and have expenses charged to it in your books as their own thing. It's not just, hey, we dumped this money into this program, it's spent. It is, this money is sitting here and we are charging expenses to it. So how do you document that? Documenting purchases. So things and contractors. Contractors are not staff, contractors are a thing you're purchasing. So you want to make sure that you are keeping itemized invoices and receipts showing who you bought the thing from, when you bought it, and how much you paid. And you need those three because you want to make sure that the date that you paid it falls within the grant funding period. So it's not something you bought before the grant and you're trying to back fund it now. You need to show that whatever the items are allowable. So it's got what you bought specifically. It's got that you bought, 30 welding rigs, and that they are included in the grant budget. So we bought 30 welding rigs, and you'll see over here in the budget says we're going to buy 30 welding rigs. So what you bought, when you bought it, how much it cost. And then to make sure that you actually did that, you also generally need to hold on to any canceled checks that you've got showing the actual payment amount and the amount of payment. This may be changing as things get more digital, but my experience with this has always been make sure we've got a copy of the check somewhere if someone asks. Also, having an itemized listing connected to that grant. So not only do you have these receipts, not only do you have the canceled checks, you are able to show in your ledger $100,000 came in from this grant. Here are the expenses we charged to it. They add up to $100,000. Here's the receipts for that. So if you've got this, you are good. Also, most of you are going to be charging staff time to a government grant, and you have got to document that. That's harder than stuff because you don't just get a receipt. So there has to be some method of certifying that the staff time that you are billing actually happened. And there's a few ways for that. First of all, it has to be actual hours worked towards the grant, not just, yeah, we budgeted 10% of this person's time, we're good to go. It's that we budgeted 10% of this person's time and they spent 10% of this person's time. So there's a bunch of ways to do this. You can have timesheets that people sign saying, these are the hours I worked this week, real sign, digital, whatever that is. Doing a personal certification that they worked the hours, etc. I know that a lot of universities, so the big guys getting big dollars from the federal government, do the quarterly assertion that Professor Jones and grad student Smith worked the hours they said they were going to work. I worked 200 hours towards this grant this quarter. I'm signing this, I dated it. I am saying that I did this. That puts the onus on me, not necessarily the organization. So that works. That's what a lot of people do. The other thing too is that whatever you're doing has to be consistent with written policies. So you have to have, as an organization, a policy on that. It has to say you need to keep a timesheet, you need to give us a quarterly assertion. Whatever that is, however you want to track that, you need a written policy that says, employee, you are expected to do this. The other thing too, again, must specifically tie the time spent to the grant. So you've got a grant funding your apprenticeship program. You've got staff working for your apprenticeship program. The staff can't just certify, yes, I work 10 hours for the apprenticeship program. It is, I work 10 hours for this grant program. So again, like a little differentiation, but again, the government wants the money kept separate. They don't want, here's the money, it went into our apprenticeship program. Here's a bunch of expenses that went into our apprenticeship program. It is, here is the money, here are the expenses that we're charged against that money, without that middle of it just funded our program. With private funders, you can go the other way. The private funders, you funded our apprenticeship program. Here's how much our apprenticeship program cost. It was more than what you gave us. Thanks for your money. It was spent well. So that's kind of the big difference with government, is tying those expenses directly to the actual grant versus the program. So going to take one moment here and talk about doing this as a team sport. But I know that your teams vary quite a bit. So last poll question here about how big your team is, so I can know how long to dwell on this team sport part. Give us 30 seconds here. Okay, good. So far we don't have a one person does everything. Okay, giving this 5 more seconds. All right, I will share this really quickly. You can see most of you have got between 2 and 5 staff, which is about where I thought we were. So good, that means you've got some help. Let's talk about this. So really all of this, and grant seeking in general is a team sport, but the evaluating and reporting, everybody has got to be on board with it for it to go smoothly. It will make your life easier if it's not just you as the person who wrote the grant, you the director, whatever that is, dealing with it. So who needs to be involved and ideally should be involved? You want to have your executive director, your executive staff, your program people, your finance people, your HR people, anybody you've got doing quality improvement. I'm hoping since so many of you are educational, some of you have got that staff or somebody charged with that. But realize for every organization, these are not always a different person. Financial and HR tend to ride together quite a bit. Sometimes the program director and the quality improvement person are the same person, whatever that is. We're talking about the roles, not the person. So teamwork makes the award management work. So just a few things. The executive staff, so your director, should really inform the process. So whatever you're doing, the director should be aware of, should have their blessing. They should be confirming that whatever that work you're doing actually advances your mission and isn't you off doing something else that they don't want you to be doing. That they're okay to commit resources to that tracking, that the director knows, hey, as part of this grant, we have to spend some time doing this tracking. This money is not free. We got to do a little bit of stuff on it. Also, just getting that buy-in from the top that this funding is important and it is worth the effort you've got to do to report back to keep the funder happy, whatever that is. So really giving that kind of buy-in from the very top brings everybody else along. So program staff too, the people who are doing your actual programs, people running your apprenticeship programs, the people doing your outreach, frankly, your teachers, maybe even some of your contracted teachers, should have some voice in what the activities are. They should know what the outcomes you are promising the funder are going to be. So if you think back to that government grant, here's this list of 10 things we've got to do. Program staff, can we do all that? Okay, yes, good. Remember, we're doing all that. Then when it's time to talk about tracking all that, they know what's there. You're not surprising them. And they can help build the tracking into the daily flow of the program. And carry out the daily tracking, whatever that is, mailing the postcards from their pantry or following the LinkedIn profile, whatever that is, they know what they're expected to do. And the money comes in, you say, hey, remember that grant we applied for? We got it. Start doing this tracking. So they're bought in from the start and they've given their input. Financial staff obviously are crucial for this. And this is a point that I like to bring up. Your financial staff need to make sure that you can afford the grant. And for some of you, you can afford the grant, full stop. But you know, sometimes there is that extra stuff built in. There's a match that's required. So the government's only going to pay half. You've got to make sure that you have enough money on hand to pay the other half or staff time, whatever that is. So ensuring that the grant fits within the budget, helping develop the grant budget, understanding what expenses are going to be built in because they're going to have to track them, building in that tracking so that it's just part of the program's daily operations. They know that this grant has to be, you know, account 1112, and they know that this teacher is getting paid from account 1112. They're the ones who have to know that, so that when the report time comes, they can easily do it. If they're a really good financial person, they'll probably already have something set up in QuickBooks that looks like magic to me, where they press a button and the report pops out. Whoever's doing your HR is ultimately probably going to be responsible for the time tracking or the processes around that time tracking. So making sure they know that the funder requires some sort of time tracking, and then implementing those systems that meet the funder requirements. So if you're probably going to get government money, just following government standards is a good way to just do the same thing every time. If you're not going to get government money, you may not need to do that because it is a little intense, but making sure that HR understands what's required. Then quality improvement. Remember in minute 3, we talked about how you should be using this data, not just to make funders happy, but to improve your programs. So anybody you've got doing improvement, doing quality improvement, should A, be informed of the evaluation process and possibly help build it, and then understand how to do that evaluation and how to act on it. So I'm not saying the quality staff, if you've got them, should just be responsible for the evaluation, call it a day, but they are probably the ones who are going to sit with that data and help you find where you can improve your program, you know, where that data informs what you do and isn't just sitting there for you to mail back to the funder and make the funder happy. Because again, you're spending the time and effort, you might as well make your programs better, not just sit there and report back to the funder. So that is what I've got on this. Does anybody, and I haven't seen any questions in the Q&A, I just have launched a quick poll to rate today's webinar. And if you do have a question, throw it up in the Q&A. As far as what's next, our final webinar is coming up, putting it all together. For any of you who come to any of these, please come to that one, because it will be kind of the overview of, you know, key elements of what is going to make you stand above other people looking for money. And then talking a little bit about what trends we're seeing that might influence grant making in the future. And things are getting interesting in philanthropy, by the way. I'm assuming none of you are really paying attention to this stuff, but the number of donors is going down, and the amount of money being donated is going up, which means philanthropy is increasingly being dominated by larger players, which has some interesting impact on all of our lives and may make foundations more important going forward. So we're going to talk about that stuff. If you haven't already and you've got questions, sign up for a coaching session. And then don't forget, if you've got a quick question, drop in for our office hours. That's going to be next Tuesday, the 24th at 4 o'clock Eastern. I hope it's Tuesday. It's definitely the 24th. That will be at 4 o'clock Eastern, 1 o'clock Pacific. So if you've got any quick questions, go to the page where you signed up for this and just grab the link and drop in. So with that, I do not see any questions in the Q&A. Thank you for those of you who filled out the evaluation. Thank you for those of you who came. I hope some of you have less heartburn now than you may have had when we started talking, and you've got a better sense of what's required and how to go about doing reporting to show grant makers that you are doing what you should have been doing. So thank you all, and I hope to see you in office hours or at our next webinar.